Praise be Jesus Christ, and welcome back to Carmelcast. Carmelcast is a production of the Institute of Carmelite Studies Publications. For more information, you can visit our website at www.icspublications.org. My name is Father Pier Giorgio of Christ the King, and I'm once again joined by Brother John Mary of Jesus Crucified. How are you doing, brother?
Good. Hope everyone's having a good Advent.
Yes, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback from our recent Advent episode that we did a few weeks ago. So hopefully those tips that you spend a good amount of time coming up with are providing fruit for a lot of people. Today we are beginning our final episode of this season, if you can believe it, and just want to plug a little bit about next season, what we plan on doing. We had a lot of good feedback from last season's book study, and so we're hoping to do that again in the spring, later in the spring probably, and we will announce the book that we're doing in a few months. Hopefully we can get a new one out ahead of time, but either way, it'll be a great time, a great study, going through a book slowly together, which we had a great amount of fun doing last season, and so we're grateful to do that again next season. This being our final episode of this season, we wanted to focus on something, an anniversary that is going to be coming up in the next few weeks on January 1st, on New Year's Day, in fact. January 1st is the 100th anniversary of the baptism of St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, St. Edith Stein. And so today we're going to be focusing a little bit about this great saint of the 20th century, and in particular her conversion leading up to her baptism. And if you're interested more about her life, we did do an episode in an earlier season kind of about overviewing her life more in general. So I encourage you to go check that episode out. It's from season 2 to learn a little bit more about her if you don't know much about her. But we hope that this episode will be a good starting point as well. So if you want to learn more about her, maybe you can go check out that episode from season 2 of Carmelcast. So we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of her baptism, which occurred on January 1st, 1922. And it's interesting because there were a sequence of events that are well recorded that ultimately led up to this baptism. And so we have a pretty good picture of what Edith Stein's conversion was all about. The first thing that we have is that we know that she read the life, the autobiography, the book of her life of St. Teresa of Jesus. And this had a profound impact on her. And we know, we've heard the story of when she finished reading Teresa's book of her life, she closed the book and said, "This is the truth." And that's a well-known anecdote that Teresa herself shares, Teresa Benedicta shares with us herself. But what isn't completely clear is there's some discrepancy about how exactly she got this copy of this book. Because I think earlier accounts from St. Teresa Benedicta's own prioress intimated that perhaps she had found this book in the library shelves of the home that she was staying at, and that home being her good friend and who would become her godmother, Hedwig Conrad Martius. And the reason why this is a little bit tricky is because Hedwig Conrad Martius herself was not Catholic. She was a devout Lutheran woman, and even though Edith Stein was baptized as a Catholic, she had to get a dispensation for Hedwig to be her godmother. And so it wouldn't make complete sense, I think, for us to, I guess there's a question there, right? Why would a Lutheran have this copy of St. Teresa's book of her life? So the later development in how she came to read St. Teresa of Avila's book of her life was a testimony at the time of Teresa Benedicta's beatification from her good friend who later became a Benedictine nun. And she testifies that she gave the book of her life of St. Teresa of Avila to Edith as she was boarding a train to go visit her friend Hedwig. So it's an interesting development that we have this testimony from an individual person who says, no, I am the one who gave this book to Teresa Benedicta. And we don't know exactly when she read it, but she read it sometime in the weeks after that. She was getting on this train in the late summer, and within a few weeks, we hear about a letter from Edith to her sister Erna saying to prepare their mother for her conversion to Catholicism. But what's interesting to me about this whole aspect of reading an autobiography is how common it is. We know that our own Holy Mother, St. Teresa, read the Confessions of St. Augustine. And so it's interesting, this phenomenon of reading the lives of the saints, especially testimonies of the saints themselves, the writings of the saints themselves about their own life, about their conversion. And for me, like the content of St. Teresa's book of her life is one that I think it fascinates a lot of people, but it would have fascinated St. Teresa Benedicta as well.
Yeah, and even in the word you used there, you said there's this phenomenon, and I think it relates some to even Teresa's philosophical background of phenomenology, which is really the investigation of what are these experiences. And it seems that when we read or even hear the witness of another, or read the witness of another's conversion, it's like in some way we're able to enter into that experience with them, experience what they were experiencing, and then it becomes like a part of us as well. So it's a way that perhaps the external knowledge of Teresa Benedicta's study of Catholicism couldn't quite penetrate. But when she was able to step into the life of Teresa of Avila, it could penetrate into her own experience and bring about that conversion.
Yeah, and it's a testimony too of the fact that we don't only have encounters with living people, the people who we can talk to and speak to, but we do. It is a phenomenon that we have these encounters with those who have gone before us, who we experience through their writings or through testimonies about them or through their biographies that have a profound experience. And I think there's something interesting too about this in the fact that it's a very Catholic experience, because in the lives of in the life of the early church, even the first liturgies of the church were all sort of centered around this notion of the stories of the martyrs. The first festivals of the church were these feast days commemorating their martyrdom. And so, from the very beginnings of the Christian church, there's this phenomena of people encountering the lives of the heroes of our faith and being transformed by them, being convicted by them.
Yeah, that's very real and living experience of the church. And the church, not only those that we encounter living here, but also those who have led the way and gone before us.
So I think it's an encouragement. It's one of the reasons I'm very passionate about this. This is one of the things that I study in my master's degree is autobiography, especially the autobiographies of the saints. But I think I can't stress enough how great it is and how important it is for Catholics to read the lives of the saints, especially the testimonies of the saints themselves, to be inspired. And it's a source of grace, I think, that comes from that. And we can see that in the life of St. Teresa Benedicta herself. And St. Teresa Benedicta herself wrote an autobiography. So a plug there, published by ICS Publications. So definitely want everyone to read that, because it is a fascinating look into the life of this extraordinary woman. What's also interesting about sort of this period of St. Teresa Benedicta's conversion, this period of her life, is that her dissertation that she had written on the subject of empathy, kind of really about what we've just been talking about, this experience of encountering the other person and feeling with them, compassion for what other people are going through. And so this was the focus of her life for many years as she was writing her dissertation and leading up to writing the dissertation. I mean, she was thinking about this stuff constantly. And it's interesting because in the final paragraph of her dissertation, this is what she's talking about. It's years before she even picks up St. Teresa's book of her life. She writes that the question to be answered, the question that is probably the most interesting to her and that needs to be studied further, is this phenomenon of experiencing with another the other person's mystical experiences, the other person's experiences of grace. And so even before years, 2 or 3 years before her own conversion, she's, through her own intellectual inquiry, has been primed for for Teresa's book of her life, where Saint Teresa talks about her experience of her heart being transpierced by the angel, you know, and in her profound experiences of her own conversion from a nun, you know, in an ordinary monastery in Spain to this great foundress and now doctor of the church.
Yeah, I'm reminded of some of Teresa's other philosophical works too, which ICS I think publishes as well, where she's speaking of this reality of the problem of kind of causality of how is it that one's experience of another can cause something within them. And basically, it comes down to what she eventually would write this dissertation on is this experience of empathy, where you're able to actually enter into the experience of the other and experience it with them.
Right, right. And it's interesting because after she reads the book of her life, after she decides that she's going to be Catholic, she writes to her friend Roman Ingarden, who was kind of an intellectual, I don't know, intellectual best friend, if you could say that, of Edith Stein. She writes to him that, you know, this has become a renewed interest for me, and she's referring, you know, not in so many words, but she's referring to her experience of reading Teresa's life. And she says, you know, this is what I'm going to spend the rest of my career on, is this experience of the religious, the experience of people's religious experiences, and how we encounter those in ourselves.
I don't know if you were going to bring this up, but there's also prior to her conversion, this experience she had of go visiting her friend's house. Can you tell that story?
I wasn't going to say that, but it's another great sort of example of how she was primed for this encounter with Saint Teresa of Avila. And she tells us about this herself in her autobiography, and she tells us about it in hindsight, knowing her entire autobiography is through the lens of her own conversion from being a Jewess to becoming Catholic. And but she writes this experience of being in Frankfurt and going into the cathedral in Frankfurt and seeing a woman with her groceries next to her in the pew, just spending time sitting. And she says it was a profound experience on her because it was like this woman was meeting a friend. And certainly that experience would be confirmed in Teresa of Avila's own writings, where so much of St. Teresa's focus is on prayer as a relationship with Jesus.
And then connected with that story too is the whole experience with Anne Reinach, where Anne's husband passed away, and so Edith Stein was going to comfort her and to be with her in this time after her husband's passing, and she expected that this would be a woman, because she loved her husband so much, she expected to find a woman who was just distraught and destroyed, and just completely devastated. And instead she found a woman who was mourning but was still like hopeful, and she was able to tell Edith that it was because of her Christian faith, her hope in the resurrection, that she was able to remain strong, and that had a really profound impact on Edith.
Yeah, Edith writes that it was like that she had gone to console her friend, and in reality her friend had consoled her in the end. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, in the aftermath of Teresa of Edith Stein having this experience of conversion, she even writes to her friend Roman Ingarden on the feast of Saint Teresa of Avila, saying that she'll become Catholic, and that it's too difficult to explain. It's too difficult to explain to him in words. And of course, we know that Roman himself was a little bit of a skeptic, and so perhaps she didn't want to get into it with him. Yeah. But it's interesting, over the course of those letters, they butt heads a little bit about the faith. So that would come later. Teresa would have her impact on Roman Ingarden in the end, of course.
Edith, also, didn't she have experiences there were others in her circle, her academic circle, who were coming to the Christian faith? Other phenomenologists, philosophers who were coming to the faith as well.
Yeah, there's an interesting anecdote from her professor, Edmund Husserl, who says that who was Lutheran. He was a convert to Lutheranism from Judaism, and he joked that the Catholic Church was going to canonize him because all of his students were becoming Catholic.
Yes, it actually reminds me of did my undergrad at Auburn University, and when I was there, there were several of the philosophy professors who went to the Catholic Church. And this is in Alabama. I mean, very small percentage of Catholics in Alabama, and especially in a university town, very small percentage of people who were Catholic. And yet there was a good number of the professors at the university who were converts, philosophy professors who were converts to Catholicism. So it was easy for me to see at that time in my studies how this search for truth that these people were going on was eventually leading them to the Catholic faith.
Yeah, and of course, Saint Teresa Benedicta herself in her writings would write that anyone who is searching for truth is searching for God ultimately. And so there's this. I think there's another phenomenon that we can point to that those who are seeking the truth intently and with good intention will ultimately, we have faith, will ultimately find God in that seeking. It's interesting too, just to sort of kind of wrap up our discussion, just the experience, speaking of more phenomenon, the phenomenon of conversion itself, because I think in a time period within the church that we can't take for granted that those who are raised Catholic will stay Catholic, and with many who are raised Catholic who have a conversion experience themselves of coming back to the church, those becoming Catholic from other denominations or from other religions as well being a prominent phenomenon in the 21st century, to reflect just a moment, through the lens of St. Edith Stein's conversion, of what that exactly means. Because I think so many people who will listen to this or watch this, having had some kind of conversion experience, whether it be an intensification of their own faith, a coming to a better knowledge of the faith that they've always practiced, or a return to their faith, or a more conventional sort of conversion from one faith to another, will have the experience of it being a permanent change, from which there's really no turning back. This experience of Jesus Christ has changed my life. And it's interesting because, this is an experience that St. Teresa of Avila had herself, from being kind of a run-of-the-mill nun to a foundress of a religious order. And we can point to St. Augustine being another example of this sort of thing. So to consider what a conversion means, and the permanency of it, and the reason why I think it's permanent is because of the actual grace that we receive from God through our experience of this conversion, this complete changing of our life.
Right. It's not something external to us, but something that touches us in the deepest part of who we are, and then changes something within us, so that we're no longer the same.
The analogy that I'm thinking of, it comes from the book of St. Teresa's life itself. We talked about it before, the transpiercing of her heart. It becomes a permanent wound, and there's no going back to before the wound. And Saint Teresa Benedicta, as a nun, wrote a beautiful double sonnet, about Saint Teresa's transverberation, or the transpiercing of her heart. And it's interesting because in this poem, it's not published in English, although I did translate it on our blog, and maybe we can put a link to that. That was about a year ago I did that, so you can see it. But this poem about St. Teresa's transverberation by St. Teresa Benedicta, it speaks of the wound and then the change in the person, and the change being immediately outwardly oriented. She writes, "Thus, what is lighted must become a light." And so this notion of the experience of being lit aflame by God, by the Holy Spirit, in one's conversion, then becomes a light for the world. And to speak just of one sort of, just to compare maybe in St. Teresa Benedicta's own life, the difference between before her conversion and after her conversion. She writes that while she was sort of struggling with her dissertation, dissertations being a monumental task. I've never written one. I hope to never write one. But her struggle with this, she writes that I could no longer cross the street without wishing I would be run over by some vehicle. And when we went on an excursion, I hoped that I would fall off a cliff and not return alive. And I think she's speaking here cynically and not seriously, but experiencing or reflecting on sort of this experience for her of being so difficult and so monumental that she just wished that she had never done it, at the very least, and at the very most, the most serious of turning. The idea of turning back on what she'd given her entire life to in the pursuit of knowledge and philosophy, of being so bad that death would be better, so to speak. You compare this experience of her struggle with her final struggle at the end of her life, when she's been arrested, when she's at a transit camp with all these assumingly other Catholics who had converted from Judaism, being prepared to be sent off to their extermination. And the testimony from those who were there saying what she was doing in the midst of that. When mothers were inconsolable, she was taking care of their children. Teresa Benedicta taking care of the children of these inconsolable mothers. And so it shows what is possible when the foundation of our life is Christ. When we build our life on that firm foundation. That was the gospel this morning as we're recording this. But that firm foundation in which we build our life, and the transformation of ourselves from our previous life on sandy or shaky ground to the firm foundation of Jesus Christ in our life, and what's possible from that. I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts to or reflections on the life, the conversion of our great sister of the 20th century, St. Teresa Benedicta?
Well, just that she's Teresa Benedicta is such a contemporary saint, in that she's so close to us in proximity and time, but also that her world, her experience of conversion is very similar to our own, and our own need for conversion. Because so many people now, we can't just assume that most people are raised in the faith. And so many of us have friends and family members who aren't in the faith, even those that were raised in the faith who have fallen away. And so that there's hope through the intercession of Teresa Benedicta for their conversion, and that we should ask for her intercession for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. She's a great saint for today. Transitioning to the second half of our episode today, we had this whole season we've been talking to people about the Carmelite charism and the different ways in which it's lived, and we wanted to end this season in this theme of the Carmelite charism with probably the largest possible or potential group of those living the Carmelite charism, but perhaps living it in the most unconventional or more hidden ways. So we interviewed a family who lives down the street from us here at Holy Hill about their experience of the Carmelite charism and how they feel that they can live the charism in the context of a family living in the world. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned. So I'm here just down the road from our monastery in Hubertus, Wisconsin with the Lesnoskis, Nathan and Heidi. Thank you for being with us, or I guess I'm in your house, so thank you for having me.
We're glad you're here.
It's a beautiful, beautiful home. Thank you for inviting me, and we have this for the first time in a long time. We have a live studio audience listening in because your children are being very quiet.
You would never even know they're here.
So we'll hear from a few of them a little bit later. But this season on Carmelcast, we're talking all about the Carmelite charism and the ways in which it's lived within the church. And so we wanted to kind of end this whole theme with talking about how, one of the most hidden ways that the Carmelite charisma is lived, but also probably the most prevalent because it's happening everywhere, not just in houses down the road from a Carmelite monastery, but all over the world. People are taking the teachings of the Carmelite saints, the spirituality of Carmel, and trying to implement it into their daily lives, which is a beautiful thing and a beautiful witness to the church. And that's ultimately what charisms are about. It's the gift of the church being lived in a special way in homes and in workplaces and all these things. So I was hoping we could just start, but you guys could introduce yourselves.
Sure. Well, I'm Nathan Lesnowski, and
I'm Heidi.
And we have 8 kids, ages 15 down to 4 months?
Almost 4 months.
And 6 girls and 2 boys. And we live about 3-ish miles from Holy Hill. You can actually see it right out the window there. And it's been a huge part of our family. It's been both the place of Holy Hill and the spirituality of the Carmelites and the relationships with the Carmelites that we've had over the last many years has been a really important part of our families.
So how long have you guys been married?
18 years.
Wow.
18 years, yeah. So.
And both of you are from Wisconsin?
I'm from Minnesota,
Okay.
originally, Twin Cities area.
Yeah, and I'm from Green Bay. And we met at college in town in Milwaukee, and we stayed here, and we've made a home in the Milwaukee area as part of our life together.
So how did you come to know about Carmelites?
We lived in Menominee Falls prior to this, and then we moved out here about 10 years ago. And we were kind of looking at different churches, and we went to kind of one in the neighborhood, and then we found Holy Hill and started going there regularly, and then kind of transitioned to all the time going there. And so really learning about Carmel from the friars, from the brothers, from the homilies that we heard. We went to some of those Advent Day reflections and things like that, and learned more about some of the Carmelite saints and their spirituality. And that's what really got me interested in learning more about the Carmelites, so kind of being introduced to them from the Carmelites.
Yeah, and you have kids who have Carmelite names.
We tried to get them all in there right at the end.
Well, it's a beautiful witness to Carmel. And so what is it about the spirituality that particularly draws you, do you think?
Well, I think for me, one of the biggest elements is when we started thinking about and learning about Carmel, one of the ways we did that is we have a small group that we're part of, where we read a particular saint and their writings, and we talk about what we're learning from that. And when we started reading St. Teresa, The Way of Perfection, we were doing that after reading several other books about prayer. So our group really centered on prayer as part of our spirituality that we were focusing on as a group. And for us, it was a big reminder of how important and what bedrock prayer is for the life of a Christian, the life of a Catholic. And for us, we felt that the writings of St. Teresa really connected to us in that way, when she's talking about how prayer is the unique connector of what it is to be a person of Christ. That you're sitting and just being with Christ, or listening to Christ, or having your heart open to Christ. And prayer is really the way that we have our heart open to that. So as we started to embed ourselves in this life of thinking about prayer and creating a spirituality for our family that had the regularness of prayer in the morning, in the midday, in the afternoon, in the evening, part of the Carmelite spirituality really influenced creating that and keeping that as an important part of how we live our lives.
Yeah. And so how do you see family life in general, but in specific your family, fitting into like the whole Carmelite thing that's going on throughout the world?
We love hanging out with Carmelites. We love talking to Carmelites and seeing them, and I feel like we feel part of a family atmosphere of kind of interactions and spending time and really kind of showing, one thing that we can offer is showing Carmelites like a family, that you have your Carmel family, but then here's kind of the lay family out in the world and kind of that atmosphere and how we're trying to be holy in our daily life with dishes and laundry and children and diapers and all these things. And so giving you a taste of kind of our life, I feel like that's how we can kind of contribute and be part of the family. Mm-hmm. And also a lot of prayer. We pray for you guys all the time and know of your prayers for us, and so that also really unites us together.
Yeah, I think that's so key, the idea of intercessory prayer within the life of the church. that, the people who are consecrated are praying for the families, and that the families are praying for the consecrated, because ultimately we're in this together and we can't do it without each other. And I think that's a beautiful aspect of the life of the church, both the domestic church and kind of the monastic institutional church as well.
I feel like it's been a real joy to know the Carmelites in an extended way, right? Because you have that Carmelite family that you're part of, but also have that extended relationship with the Carmelites, and to be able to pray for you in a way that we're supporting your ministry, and to feel, to a degree, part of that ministry and spreading the gospel through what you do, and also then seeing that represented in the way our children think about who they are and how they're representing their own faith out in the world, and how the Carmelite ministry flows into them as well.
What tips or suggestions would you give to someone who wants to implement more Carmelite spirituality into their family life?
Well, I'd say it starts with the interior life. That your entire life of faith has to start with the interior life and the relationship that you have with the Lord, and the way that that is executed through prayer. And any action you're trying to take in the world, absent that interior life, is going to be fruitless. You need to have that flowing from a relationship with the Lord that's fed by prayer, and then the Lord can act through your life. But when people try to act out in the world these actions without having the bedrock of prayer, they end up doing so in a way that doesn't have those fruits bearing it. It's not bearing the fruits because it's not fed by the interior life of prayer, the relationship that they have with the Lord. So I think that what we're learning from the saints, especially is how they're calling us to have that kind of devoutness. That's what I really like about listening from the Carmelite order, is how much the friars have both an active and an interior life. They have both the life of prayer and the active life combined together, because it really represents how important the life of prayer is.
Yeah.
And I also think just picking up the books and reading them. Story of a Soul and Teresa of Avila, Way of Perfection. Just reading those books and trying to immerse yourself in the teachings and writings of the saints has really been helpful for us. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of great podcasts out there, like Carmelcast, and other things that can kind of help you along that way of understanding their spirituality and kind of guiding you on the way to go.
Are there any, times in the life of your family where particular saints have been particularly present in your life, or there's been graces that are like this is through the intercession of, Saint Therese, or, that's going on here? Do you have any stories to share kind of along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, we had a particularly recent series of years that we've gone through as a family, where we had 7 children, and throughout those 7 children, we had not experienced any miscarriages, and then we had 3 miscarriages in a row before our 8th child, Elizabeth. And in going through those 3 miscarriages, it was a really difficult experience for us as a family, and each one of those sort of brought with it its own trials. The first one was more of a sort of shock, like, whoa, this is happening, this is not something we've experienced before, why is God letting this happen to us? And then the next was this almost a sense of anger, like, why again, like, why? And then the one after that was almost a sense of defeatedness, going through each of these. And through each of those experiences, one of the saints that we really lifted up our prayers to was Saint Therese. And asking her to shower us with roses, not necessarily to fix the situation, although that would have been great, but more so just to give us the faith to be able to be faithful through that situation. And when we were pregnant with our 8th child, Elizabeth, there's a lot of sort of ups and downs in that pregnancy that led us through this sort of emotional roller coaster as we went through that. And turning that over to Saint Therese was something that allowed us to a significant degree, be able to lovingly detach from the situation, and be able to then take joy in wow, Elizabeth is here. And one of the things that I consider a miracle to a degree is, like, outside of our house is this set of rose bushes. And over the years, these rose bushes have been not particularly beautiful rose bushes. They've been attacked by by bugs and things, and they've had a flower here and there, and they've been fine, right? But my thumb has not been quite as green on those rose bushes. But this summer, right after the birth of Elizabeth, they bloomed 10 times what they had ever bloomed before, and you could just tell how much Therese, for us, was showering down roses on our family in the consolation that was this, or is this beautiful child that we have in our family now. And now every time when I walk up to Holy Hill, there's a statue of St. Therese, and I pause to say a prayer because it reminds me of how much our Lord blesses us, and our Lord is with us through those challenging times, but then also is there in the consolations as well. So for me, that was really, it was a hard period. It was a difficult period of faith, and our relationships with the Carmelites were instrumental in helping us just personally to kind of make it through that. But now of course, we're experiencing the consolations from that. So it was a really meaningful part of that part of our life.
And I feel St. Therese has walked with me these last few years, especially my vocation as a mom and as a teacher of the kids for homeschooling. And so kind of thinking in my head over and over, my vocation is love, and living out that love while I'm doing laundry, while I'm doing dishes, while I'm doing all these kind of small things that nobody really sees. But to really feel that this is what I'm doing for my family out of love and for my Lord and for my family. And so kind of living out that vocation at home and those little things has been really beautiful.
What was it you said the other day, to find your Carmel, right?
Well, that was Elizabeth of the Trinity also talked about having like a cell, kind of like how she talked a lot about her cells in her letters that I was reading. And so kind of finding your own cell throughout the days where you can pray and be with God, whether that's folding laundry again or dishes, but taking that time to kind of quiet your heart and mind and to have that prayer time where you can get it.
You've mentioned a lot of different writings of the Carmelite saints, just as we've been talking, but what would be maybe one each that you would recommend for people to read?
It's kind of funny, but I read Story of the Soul. It's probably my first Carmelite work. And at first I was kind of like, Therese almost seemed a little too perfect. A little bit too like, okay, really? Like, I mean, you were, from an early age on, she was just amazing. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm so far from that. And then I read like an annotated version by the Carmelites and had some commentary in it and kind of added a little bit more of the stuff that I think they had taken out to give a little bit more complete picture of her. Just kind of some more of the trials that she had in the convent, in the monastery with other sisters and things, kind of some of those little stories. And then I felt like I could really relate to her a lot more. So it was a beautiful story, but kind of an interesting thing to see the two versions of the translation that she has. But that was one really great book that we read.
I think for me, there's two to a degree. I think the first one would be The Way of Perfection, but I really appreciate the one that had the study questions in it, because I felt like for me that let me read it and then take some time to really understand it for myself and how it was impacting the way I was living my Christian walk. I think for me, what I really took from it the most was about where she's talking about just resting with the Lord, resting with the Lord and being in a way to hear what He has to say to you. I feel like one of the things I didn't take very seriously earlier in my life was how powerful prayer is, and understanding that the nuns of the Carmelite order, they lived their whole life just in prayer and in seclusion. And what that spoke to me, and it's something I didn't really realize until later, and especially after reading The Way of Perfection, was how much they, when we're asked about helping someone, we say, okay, I'll pray for you, but what can I actually do? Right? Kind of like prayer is like whatever, right? But what they're doing through living their life in the way that they are is they're showing that prayer is the thing, and that the active life isn't as critical as what we accomplish, or as powerful as what we accomplish in prayer. So the way in which she conveys the sort of approachability of prayer in her writings is really powerful, and it's not particularly heavy. I mean, it can be heavy reading, but I appreciate how it's approachable reading. I think the other one is some of the writings of Elizabeth of the Trinity, And she has just some very beautiful prayers where she's talking about releasing her own will and taking in the will of God. And that being to whatever extent she can release what she wants and really just to rest in the will of the Lord. That for me was also meaningful as we were going through some of our challenges with the miscarriages, because I wanted something and I couldn't get it. But I had to be able to just accept that the will of the Lord is something different in my life right now, and that's okay. And I needed to rest in the consolation of the Lord through that. And so for her, it was something that, or for me, it was something that her writings really helped me to kind of work through those challenges.
Thank you, Nathan and Heidi, so much for sitting down. Your kids have been so patient and quiet, so we have to get them involved a little bit. So we'll ask them a few questions right after this.
I'm Maddie.
I'm Cecilia.
Yeah, I was going to talk about St. Therese and her story of a soul, and how she uses, does small things for great love, and that's really cool, and how she sacrifices, and even though she's not like a huge saint, but she does small sacrifices to achieve bigger goals. So that was
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Cecilia, who's your favorite Carmelite saint?
Therese.
Saint Therese? Why do you like Saint Therese?
Because she showered roses on me.
She showers roses on everybody. That's awesome. Well, very good. Thank you for sharing your favorite Carmelite saints with us.
You're welcome.
I'm Emily. I'm Ethan.
Now, Emily, you said that you love Carmelite feast days. What do you love about Carmelite feast days?
Well, I like how the homilies talk about the saints and how it inspires holiness. And we usually get like a cookie or treat on a feast day of Carmelite.
Good, that's awesome. And Ethan, you have a special memory that you want to tell everybody about.
Last time we played a game of the Catch the Flag, we crushed them games of Catch the Flag, we crushed them 3-1.
Yeah.
Oh, 0.
That was so you played Capture the Flag with some of the friars and you guys crushed them. Well, that's a great memory and a great story. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce yourselves? And we have Therese. Yeah. Josie.
And Elizabeth.
Little Elizabeth, who we heard about earlier. Beautiful. So, who are some of your favorite Carmelite saints?
Elizabeth likes St. Elizabeth of the Trinity.
Of course.
I like St. Edith Stein.
Really? Wow. Therese, who's your favorite Carmelite saint? Can you tell us? Yeah, Therese, right?
Benedict, who do you like to pray for? Who do you like to pray for? Pray for priests.
Pray for priests. Wow, those are powerful prayers you're praying. Thank you. I'm a priest, you know that? So you're praying for me too. Thank you. Very good.